For millennia, humanity has lived under a vast and often terrifying sky, surrounded by phenomena we could not comprehend. The roar of thunder, the flash of lightning, the silent march of the stars, the sudden, devastating arrival of disease. These were not random occurrences. They were the actions of powerful, unseen forces. They were the language of the gods. In the absence of knowledge, we filled the void with divinity. Every gap in our understanding became a space for a god to inhabit. The god of the sun drove his fiery chariot across the sky. The god of the sea stirred the waves in his anger. The god of the harvest blessed the fields, and the god of the plague cursed the cities. This is the story of the oldest and most resilient argument for the divine, the god of the gaps. The logic is simple, intuitive, and deeply human. If we do not know how something works, it must be the work of a supernatural agent. This god of the gaps is a god of convenience, a placeholder for our ignorance. He resides in the darkness at the edge of our knowledge, and for most of human history, his kingdom was vast. But a new way of thinking emerged, a revolutionary process of observation, experimentation, and verification. It was called science. And with every discovery, with every new law of physics and principle of biology we uncovered, the territory of the unknown began to shrink. This video is the story of that shrinking kingdom. It is the story of how science, step by step, has been evicting God from the gaps in our understanding, leaving him with less and less space to occupy. Our journey begins with the most primal forces of nature. For ancient civilizations, the weather was the daily expression of divine mood. A storm was not a meteorological event. It was the fury of a sky god. For the Norse, thunder was the sound of Thor's hammer. For the Greeks, lightning was a spear thrown from Mount Olympus by Zeus himself. These were not mere metaphors, they were the most rational explanations available. The gods provided a cause for the terrifying and unpredictable effects they witnessed. They answered the question, why, when the question, how, was impossible to even ask. For centuries, these divine explanations reigned supreme, shaping rituals, sacrifices, and the daily lives of billions. Then slowly, the first scientific challenges emerged. The ancient Greeks themselves, despite their vibrant pantheon, began to look for natural causes. Philosophers like Thales and Anaximander proposed that phenomena like lightning could be caused by natural processes involving wind and clouds. But it was not until the 18th century, with the work of Benjamin Franklin, that the god of lightning faced a true existential threat. Franklin's famous kite experiment demonstrated the electrical nature of lightning, proving that this spectacular, terrifying force was not the spear of a god, but a measurable, predictable discharge of atmospheric electricity. It was a profound shift. Science had not just explained a phenomenon, it had explained away a god. Thor and Zeus were not killed by a rival deity, but by a simple, elegant, verifiable explanation. The next great domain of the gods was the sky itself. The clockwork precision of the sun, moon, and stars was surely evidence of a divine architect. The earth was the center of this creation, the fixed stage upon which the human drama unfolded, with the heavens revolving around it in perfect God-ordained circles. This geocentric model, formalized by Ptolemy and later adopted as official church doctrine, was not just a scientific theory, it was a theological necessity. It placed humanity at the center of God's attention. To question this model was not just to question the science, it was to question God's plan and humanity's special place within it. But the gaps in this model began to show. The strange, retrograde motions of the planets didn't quite fit. For centuries, astronomers patched the system with ever more complex, epicycles, celestial gears within gears, to make the observations fit the theory. Then came Nicholas Copernicus, who proposed a radically simpler and more elegant explanation. What if the Earth was not the center? What if the Earth and the other planets revolved around the Sun? This idea was so dangerous that Copernicus waited until he was on his deathbed to publish it. It was Galileo Galilei who, with his newly constructed telescope, provided the definitive evidence. When he observed the moons of Jupiter, he saw a miniature solar system that did not revolve around the Earth. He saw the phases of Venus, proving it orbited the Sun. The reaction from the Church was swift and severe. Galileo was accused of heresy, tried by the Inquisition, and forced to recant. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The Church put his books on the Index of Forbidden Texts, where they remained for over 200 years, but they could not forbid the evidence. The god of the gaps, who held the planets in their perfect Earth-centered orbits, was overthrown. He was replaced by the laws of gravity, first described by Isaac Newton. Newton himself was a deeply religious man and believed he was uncovering the mechanics of God's creation. But in providing a natural law to explain the motions of the heavens, he had, ironically, made God's constant intervention unnecessary. The divine architect was becoming a divine retiree. Perhaps the most personal and intimate gap for God to occupy was within the human body itself. The emergence of life, the complexity of our organs, the mystery of consciousness, surely these were the direct work of a divine hand. For millennia, disease was seen as a supernatural event, a punishment from God, a demonic affliction, or an imbalance of mystical humors. Plagues were not caused by microbes, but by divine wrath. Epilepsy was not a neurological disorder, but demonic possession. The mentally ill were not sick, but cursed. Treatments involved prayer, exorcism, and appeals to saints, because the problem was spiritual, not physical. Then, another scientific revolution began. With the invention of the microscope, Antony van Leeuwenhoek opened up a new, unseen world teeming with animalcules. This laid the groundwork for Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch to develop the germ theory of disease. Suddenly, plagues had a natural cause: bacteria and viruses. With this knowledge came the power to fight back with sanitation, vaccines, and antibiotics. The God who sent plagues to punish sinners was replaced by microbiology. Similarly, neuroscience began to map the brain. We discovered that epilepsy was caused by storms of electrical activity in the neurons. Mental illnesses were linked to chemical imbalances. The innermost workings of the human body were being explained, and the need for a supernatural explanation was fading with each discovery. This brings us to the greatest battle of all, the one that continues to this day: the origin of species. The sheer diversity and intricate complexity of life on Earth has always been the ultimate argument for a divine designer. The eye, with its lens and retina, the wing of a bird, the interlocking parts of a bacterial flagellum, these marvels of engineering, it was argued, could not possibly have arisen by chance. They were the undeniable fingerprints of God. This was the argument from design, most famously articulated by William Paley, who compared finding a living creature to finding a watch on a heath. Just as the watch implies a watchmaker, the complexity of life implies a divine creator. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and in doing so, he provided the single most powerful explanation for the complexity of life, completely removing the need for a divine designer. He proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. He showed how, over vast spans of time, random variations combined with the relentless pressure of survival could produce the illusion of design. There was no need for a conscious creator. The environment itself acted as the designer, selecting for traits that enhance survival and reproduction. The wing, the eye, the intricate patterns of nature, all could be explained by this slow, blind, but astonishingly powerful natural process. Darwin's theory was not just a biological hypothesis, it was a philosophical earthquake. It challenged the literal interpretation of Genesis, and more profoundly, it dethroned humanity from its special, created pedestal. In the Darwinian view, humans were not the unique pinnacle of creation, made in God's image. We are one branch on a vast and complex tree of life, descended from the same common ancestors as every other living thing. The reaction was, and in many places still is, one of fierce resistance. The argument from design did not disappear. It simply retreated into smaller gaps, rebranding itself as intelligent design and focusing on complex biochemical systems that, it claims, are irreducibly complex. But time and again, science has shown how these supposedly impossible evolutionary pathways are, in fact, possible. The God of the gaps, who designed life itself, is now cornered, defending ever-shrinking pockets of biochemical complexity. So where is the God of the gaps today? As science has explained, the weather, the cosmos, and the diversity of life, the divine has been forced to retreat into the truly grand and the truly mysterious gaps that remain. Today, you will find him primarily in two places, at the very beginning of the universe and in the mystery of consciousness. The first argument goes like this. Science can explain everything since the Big Bang, but it cannot explain the Big Bang itself. What caused the universe to come into existence from nothing? That must be God. This is the God of cosmology, the prime mover. It is true that the ultimate origin of the universe is one of the deepest mysteries in all of science. But to say, we don't know, therefore God, is the exact same logical fallacy that our ancestors used when they said, we don't know what causes thunder, therefore Thor. It is simply inserting a supernatural placeholder where our knowledge currently ends. Physicists like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking have proposed viable, testable hypotheses for how a universe could arise from nothing, according to the laws of quantum mechanics. We do not yet have the final answer, but the gap is not a safe haven for God. It is an active and vibrant field of scientific inquiry. To place God in that gap is to bet against the continued progress of human curiosity. History has shown this to be a consistently losing bet. The final refuge for the God of the gaps is inside our own minds. The argument is that science can explain how the brain works, the neurons, the synapses, the chemistry, but it can never explain subjective experience or consciousness. How does the firing of neurons create the feeling of seeing the color red, the experience of being in love, the sensation of being a self? This hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers calls it, is the last great mystery. And in that gap, many place the idea of a soul, an immaterial spirit breathed into us by God. This is perhaps the most compelling gap of all, because it is so personal. But neuroscience is making stunning progress. We can now correlate specific brain states with specific subjective experiences with incredible precision. We understand how brain damage can alter personality, how chemical changes can create or cure depression. While we haven't solved the hard problem, we are methodically explaining all the functions once attributed to an immaterial soul. Just as with the origin of the universe, this gap is not a sign of the divine, it is the frontier of science. To claim that God is the answer is to prematurely declare the investigation over. The story of the God of the gaps is the story of a retreat. It is the story of a once vast kingdom, whose territories have been ceded, one by one, to the relentless advance of natural explanation. The gods of weather, disease, and the heavens have been retired. The God who designed life has been replaced by the elegant mechanics of evolution. The God who currently resides in the origin of the universe and the mystery of consciousness is a refugee, living in the shrinking wilderness at the edge of our knowledge. This does not make the universe any less wonderful or awe-inspiring. In fact, it does the opposite. To learn that lightning is a magnificent dance of atmospheric electrons is more awesome, not less, than believing it is a spear thrown by an angry deity. To understand that we are the product of an unbroken 4 billion year chain of life, connected to every living thing on this planet, is a far more profound and spiritual truth than the story of being sculpted from dust in a single afternoon. To know that our consciousness arises from the staggering complexity of the 100 trillion connections in our brain is more wondrous than to believe it is the work of an invisible spirit. Science does not strip the world of its magic. It reveals a deeper, more intricate and more spectacular magic. It replaces the simple, supernatural answers of our childhood with a far more grand and beautiful understandings of our reality. The eviction of the God of the gaps is not a loss of wonder. It is its greatest liberation.